and freezing at the Jersey Shore. We are getting ready for a snowstorm. The details keep fluctuating from a minute to minute basis, so we're all on the edge. I'm sure some people at the Jersey Shore that might be listening to this feel the same. I mean, I can't speak for your situation specifically because you might be in a different era than I am with different expectations, different living situation, etc. But one thing's for sure, we're all going to be waiting to see how this plays out in some way, shape, or form. But for us on the East Coast and like the Midwest kind of, like Michigan, Ohio, like, in that type of area, Minnesota, some of us, for those of us that are football fans, that might work out for us because that means tomorrow we get to sit on the couch. And the good thing is, with the football games tomorrow, the conference championship, respectively AFC and NFC, Broncos, Patriots, and Seahawks, Rams, they're both out west where they probably won't be as affected by it as we are. So, shouldn't have such a dramatic effect on football in terms of the live games. So, that could create a perfect viewing experience for some of us. But that all remains to be determined. We're not going to know for sure until it actually happens. But one thing's for sure is that we've seen a huge discussion about stats in sports, and that's been a thing that's been going particularly in fantasy sports era throughout the 21st century with football, basketball most noticeably about statistics, especially in relation to fantasy sports. We talk about three-point shots, and like basketball, three-point shots, most blocks, most rebounds, most assists, etc., most points in a game, most points in a season, most points of all time, all that, most points in franchise history. In football, kind of the same, most rushing yards, most passing yards, most receiving yards, most tackles, most made field goals either in season, in history, in a franchise's history, in the decade, etc. It's just an ongoing cycle of stats in the fantasy era. And we as sports fans have become obsessed with stats. But that raises the question as to, when the question's kind of obvious, are stats overrated? The obvious answer is yes, but it's not just a matter of, okay, are the stats overrated? It's more so taking a deep dive into how stats are overrated and to what extent. Like, that's the big thing right here. Like, and I've started thinking about it. You might have seen the thumbnail. This was just recently. Kevin Durant moved his way up on the all-time three-point leader for regular season three points made to 11th. And we've seen that record broken numerous times. And we've seen Reggie Miller at one point held the record for most three-pointers made a regular season. Then Ray Allen broke it in the 2010-2011 regular season. And then eventually Steph Curry broke it. Then eventually James Harden passed Ray Allen and Reggie Miller. So we've seen that change at least three times in our lifetime for most three-pointers made. So, we saw LeBron James break the record for most regular season points of all time. We just keep seeing these records, statistical records, get broken. We saw most rushing touchdowns in a season. It was Sean Alexander in the NFL broke it 05, and the very next year Tomlinson broke it, and that looks like it's going to stay. We saw Randy Moss in the 07 season, his first year in New England, break the record for most touchdowns in a season. We've seen the quarterback record for most passing touchdowns in a season broken. So, this is a very statistical obsessed era of sports. And you can see part of the reason why we keep seeing these records broken, most notably in football and basketball. Even for those that don't really follow baseball much, we saw like Barry Bonds 1 point broke the home run record, and we've seen a lot has changed. But now the real question is, to what extent are stats overrated? Well, let's start with a couple things. Number one, stats don't tell the entire story because stats don't calculate wins and losses. They don't calculate the differences in errors because usually in sports, we've seen in recent years through all sports have become more pro offense. Like the rules have been tweaked up to make it more in favor of offensive scoring, and that's in all sports too. Like you most see basketball with they don't allow hand checking. It's become more of a 3-point shot game to increase the stat totals and increase final scores. We've seen in football as well a lot of pass interference penalties, roughing the passer penalties that back in previous decades wouldn't have been penalties at all. So that's played a role in seeing a more offensive friendly approach to football where teams are more likely to have high scoring games. And don't get me wrong, we've always had throughout football high scoring games. There's always been games that have been high scoring in all hours, but it seems like it's become the rules have been tweaked up where it's more common now than in past years. And that plays a role in it too. Like we've seen this a lot though. But here's the thing with stats. Like when you look at let's just take one example. Let's start with the NBA career scoring leaders. We got LeBron James as the leader. Behind that, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And then number 3, Karl Malone. Kobe Bryant 4. Michael Jordan 5. We see Kevin Durant 6. Dirk Nowitzki 7th. 8th. Wilt Chamberlain, James Harden 9. Shaquille O'Neal 10. But a lot of this we notice we've noticed, here's the thing. A lot of those guys in that top 10 I just listed are guys that have played more so in the modern era. You have some older school guys like Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but a lot of them played more in the modern era, like James Harden, Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Durant, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, in an era where offensive scoring is more common. Not to mention, this doesn't factor in career longevity, too. Like a lot of these guys on this list have had long, extensive careers, too. You have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar from 1969 to 1989. You've seen LeBron James 2003 to present. Kobe 1996 to 2016, 20 seasons. MJ 1984 to 2003, but that doesn't include 3 seasons in during that stretch where he wasn't in the NBA. Because remember, he had that retirement or gambling suspension, 94-95, then the 98-99, 99-2000, 2000-2001. Actually, 3 seasons he didn't play. So that was 4 seasons throughout that stretch Michael Jordan didn't play. If he would have played all those seasons, imagine how many more points he would have scored. He probably would have been higher than He would have been higher than Kobe Bryant. He may have been number 3 on the list for all-time scoring had he not had those 4 seasons during that stretch where he wasn't in the league. So that's another thing that factors in too. Because Michael Jordan, remember, is considered the greatest of all time amongst a lot of his peers and amongst fans. But then you look, there's 4 other players that scored higher than him, but that doesn't factor in the 4 seasons during Michael Jordan's entire career where he wasn't in the league. One, either retirement or gambling suspension, the time he went retired after his Bulls tenure before he came back to play 2 seasons with the Wizards. So that's not incorporated as well. And doesn't include as well number of games played as well with these guys. Like you don't factor in with this. Like you don't see how many games per season did these guys say. The stats don't tell you that one. Stats don't tell you how active they were. They don't tell you which years of their career were the highest production-wise, which years were the lowest. So that doesn't really tell the full story here. And you look at, I'll put another example. Tim Duncan's considered the greatest power forward in NBA history, but he ranks 18th on all-time for career scoring. But then you have Elvin Hayes, who was a hybrid of power forward and center for the Wizards/Bullets back in the 70s, is on there high. You have Dirk Nowitzki's higher than him, but that doesn't factor in the full story. Dirk's higher because he was a great three-point shooter as well. Tim Duncan, he's considered one of the greatest power forwards for his presence in the paint and his presence on defense and his basketball IQ, not to mention. Tim Duncan also had a ton of assists to guys like Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker as well. So part of the reason why Tim Duncan's considered the greatest power forward is because of his team playing ability, his basketball IQ, but that doesn't get factored in into the stats for scoring. So that's one way stats don't tell the entire story. Then you've got Kevin Garnett, who's arguably considered the second greatest power forward, potentially. He's in the 20s for all-time career scoring. So there's just a lot of factors that don't come into play with these all-time lists. And part of it too, another reason why, the reason why a guy too like LeBron James scored a lot more points than a guy like Tim Duncan is LeBron spent most of his career carrying the offensive weight for his teams, especially during his first and second tenure with the Cavs. And even there have been seasons throughout LeBron's career he was pretty much carrying the team. Or the reason a guy like Allen Iverson's higher on all-time scoring than Tim Duncan is because Iverson spent most of his prime with the Sixers doing all the work on offense. Whereas, I stand corrected. No, actually, Tim Duncan's higher than Allen Iverson, but there's so many different things. Like Allen Iverson, though, is higher than Dwayne Wade, whereas Dwayne Wade had a few years during his career, he wasn't the lead guy. LeBron James took over that spot as the lead guy. And then you also, in the later years of his career, D-Wade was more of a role player, whereas Allen Iverson primarily spent his whole career pretty much being the lead guy on the offense. But Dwayne Wade's considered an all-time better player than Iverson because of his team playing ability. The fact that he was involved in 5 finals runs throughout his career. He won a finals MVP. So there's something that the stats don't tell you. Right, there's something you don't see. Now, Kevin Durant's higher all-time career scoring than Steph Curry, but here's one thing you don't see. Steph Curry was more of a three-point shooter. Steph Curry was more of a team player as the lead guy on the Golden State Warriors. Because as well as being a guy who can score points, he's also a team leader too. So there's that. And it reminds me all of a Bill Belichick quote. Now, this isn't necessarily 100% accurate, but the quote is, "Final scores for winners, stats are for losers." Which is really what he's implying is that the final score is more important than the stats. And that analogy can be used across all sports. I mean, you take perfect example, see Bradley Beal with the Wizards. I mean, Bradley Beal put up some good statistical numbers with the Wizards, but that didn't translate over to any team success and never truly solidified Bradley Beal as one of the top players. Now, Beal was an all-star. He was one of the better players in the Eastern Conference, but he was never considered an elite player because the Wizards didn't really win anything with him as the lead guy. Bradley Beal's best team runs came in the mid-2010s when John Wall was the lead guy and he was number 2. So that's one way you could say stats are overrated. Bradley Beal's 20-plus a game for the Wizards. What did that translate over for the team? Look at when Goran Dragic was the lead guy on the offense for the Phoenix Suns in the mid-2010s. Yeah, he had some solid statistical years, but the Phoenix Suns as a team went nowhere with him as the lead guy. It wasn't until he went to Miami, really as the number 3 guy behind Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler, especially in that bubble run, that Goran Dragic experienced his best team success. So the point of the story is stats don't tell the full story. Not to mention the one time the Suns made a conference finals run with Dragic, that was when you still had Amari Stoudemire and Steve Nash leading the way for that team. So there's just so many different factors that don't come in. So stats really don't tell the full story. You could look at football, for example. We joked, particularly with Matthew Stafford, who has a Super Bowl win to his credit, who will be starting in the conference championship, who's one of the contenders for this season's MVP. But we joked about him being Stathu Patford because during his tenure with the Lions, he put up these amazing fantasy football statistics, but it wasn't until this season, this regular season that just passed, that Matthew Stafford was above 500 for his career record as a starter. Because the Detroit Lions didn't have a complete team. So those statistical performance didn't matter. Now, granted, you can say that Matthew Stafford's case, it was the team in Detroit that let him down, and to some degree that's true, because the Detroit Lions were not the best team, for sure. You can clearly look at Matthew Stafford with the Detroit Lions versus the Rams. He clearly had a better system and structure around with the Rams, with Sean McVay, guys like Devontae Adams for this year, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp during his tenure there, OBJ for that run in 2021. And clearly you see the structure was much better, and you clearly see Stafford had more team success in that system than in Detroit, because Detroit didn't have the full structure to make runs. I mean, so in that regard, he says on one hand that Matthew Stafford's statistical performances in Detroit really didn't matter that much because he wasn't in a great team situation. It wasn't until he got to the Rams that he really saw team success. I think people honestly respect Matthew Stafford more for his run with the Rams in his later years than they do with the Lions. And I think people credit Matthew Stafford as one of the better quarterbacks of the 21st century. Not the best, not one of the best, but one of, maybe like at least a top 30 quarterback since 2000. Mainly because of his run with the Rams. Going his first year after years of being in Detroit, going to a new offense, and being able to be good enough to lead a team to a Super Bowl. Yes, you had Jalen Ramsey, Von Miller, Aaron Donald, the three-tiered monster on defense. You had all those great weapons around them, but Matthew Stafford still had to be good enough not to screw the pooch with that team, and he was. And every season Matthew Stafford's played a majority of the season, the Rams have at least made the playoffs. And tomorrow they're set for the conference championship game, so obviously the bottom line is, honestly, Matthew Stafford's been good enough with what he's had with the Rams. You know, where now he's a more respected quarterback than he was in Detroit in my book. Or you look at, see a quarterback like Donovan McNabb, who didn't have the greatest statistics in the world, but he had more respect during his peak, I think, because of those runs where the Eagles made it to the conference championship game and they even had that Super Bowl appearance. Now, the McNabb shortcoming was the record in conference championship games, 1-4 in 5 conference championship game appearances, 0-1 in a Super Bowl. So Matthew Stafford, Matthew Stafford may have had better stats than McNabb, but McNabb at his peak was more respected than Stafford in Detroit because of the win-loss record. So ultimately, it's about a lot more than just stats. I mean, part of the reason Archie Manning's not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame is because of the win-loss record in New Orleans. Now, I believe Archie Manning was a solid quarterback, good quarterback, who, if he was in a better team situation, he may have had more playoff starts. But I just don't think Archie Manning was ever the guy that was going to lead a Super Bowl run. He wasn't Joe Montana. He wasn't a guy like that, or a guy like Roger Staubach in the 70s, Terry Bradshaw in the 70s, that was going to lead a team to the promised land. Now, maybe in a better team situation, Archie Manning could have started in more playoff games, but I don't think he was going to lead a team to a Super Bowl. He wasn't going to be what his oldest son, Peyton Manning, became, and one of the top 5 greatest quarterbacks in NFL history, or even what his younger son Eli became with the Giants, is being considered arguably the Giants' greatest franchise quarterback alongside Phil Simms. And here's another point with stats. Eli, too. Eli Manning is one of the leaders in all-time passing yards. He has 2 Super Bowl rings, but some people still think he doesn't have a case for the Hall of Fame because of, some of the down seasons Eli had, where he led the league in interceptions, or because of his above average win loss record as a starting quarterback for his career. And that's part of so that also plays a factor too. And now on the flip side, sometimes stats do tell the story. Statistically, the Giants defense did more in Super Bowl 42 with that relentless pass rush to keep them in that game going into the fourth quarter late in that final drive than Eli Manning did. Like last year, you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, Saquon Barkley was the leader on offense. And his rushing played a key role in the Eagles reaching the Super Bowl and eventually winning it last year. That Eagles defense efficiency in the second half of games last year, where they had continuously outscored their opponents, played a key role in them winning the Super Bowl. So that's one example where stats do tell an indication of the story. They do tell a pretty good part of the story. Now you look at the QB stats for Super Bowl 52 between the Eagles and Patriots with Nick Foles and Tom Brady, it was just an all-offensive shootout. That tells you a pretty good portion of the story of that game. So yeah, sometimes stats tell the story, but they don't always tell the full story. So I feel like that, yeah. I mean, you look at, like, say, the all-time regular season leading scorer in basketball. Back to that for a second. All the guys in that top list are all Hall of Fame players in one way or another. So that tells you in part that all the greats had the ability to score points for their team. So that's one part of the story being told, but it's not telling the full story. Now you see one way that it tells the story is like you see the efficiency at which centers scored in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s versus now, where you see more guards being the one to lead the team in scoring. That tells you a part of the story of how the game shifted toward more three-point shooting and the smaller and versatile shooter than it has the dominant big men. So in one way, that is telling part of the story of the NBA's change in the product. So we've seen examples where stats do tell the story, like win-loss record, or perfect example, Joe Namath and my case for him being the most overrated quarterback. You look at his win-loss record and stats, more losses than wins. You look at his touchdown to interception ratio for his career, more INTs than TDs. You compare him to quarterbacks amongst his era, Bart Starr, Len Dawson, Johnny Unitas. Those three all had more touchdown passes than interceptions and more career wins than losses. So that's one way that's one supporting argument for my claim that Joe Namath is the most overrated quarterback in NFL history. And this isn't even comparing him to QBs of other eras. So the point I'm getting at here is, yes, sometimes stats do tell the story. Sometimes they tell a pretty good story in certain cases. But as used with examples earlier, such as LeBron James leading over Michael Jordan for all-time career scoring, that doesn't really mean that LeBron James is the GOAT all alone. Remember, Michael Jordan had to play in a tougher era, in a more physical era, and he still reached fifth all-time in scoring in a tougher era. And remember, not to mention, from 1984 to 2003, there were 4 full seasons Michael Jordan did not play. If he plays those 4 full seasons, he scores a lot more points and is higher on the all-time points statistical graphic instead of 5th if he plays those 4 seasons. So that makes a big difference right there. So that's one example where the stats don't tell the story. Stats alone does not tell you that LeBron James was a better player than Michael Jordan. Not at all. Not to mention, like I said, the differences in era. Nowadays, it's more common to have those 40-plus point games than it was in the Jordan era. It still happened during that era. Jordan had his 40-plus point games, but it wasn't as common because the game was more physical back then. There weren't as many fouls called for physical play as there is in the LeBron era. So that's one way you don't get the full story. So For certain instances where stats do tell the story in sports, there's other instances where it doesn't tell the full story. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. You could use an individual sport like boxing or MMA. You look at individual fighters' records. Like, we'll say one person's undefeated, but another person has more career losses. Does that mean the person with that's undefeated had a better career? Alone, no, it does not. Because you got to look closer at their careers. Look at the competition they took on. Look at who they beat. Did they beat the best of their era? So that's an example from individual sports where stats don't tell the full story, where career win-loss records for individual sports don't tell you who was better than the other alone until you look at the level of competition each competitor went against. I mean, just in general throughout sports, you can point to some examples where the stats tell the story, like win-loss records. Like my theory that Joe Namath is the most overrated quarterback. Compares win-loss record, TDI, and T ratio to other quarterbacks. That proves a pretty good point there. If I want to argue that centers have become less reliant in the offense, look at how much guys like Patrick Ewing, look at the stats like Patrick Ewing, Shaquille O'Neal, Akeem Olajuwon, David Robinson in their peaks versus Dwight Howard, Marc Gasol in their peaks. Kind of tells you a story about how the years went along. It went more from dominant big men to even more focused on guards. I mean, you always had those guards throughout all eras, like Oscar Robertson, Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant. Clyde Drexler, you always had guards that could take lead of the offense. John Stockton, Jason Kidd. But as the years went along, you started to see that transition go even more now. Guys like Curry, Doncic. You got guys, of course, other guys on other teams such as SGA. Just to name you a few examples. De'Aaron Fox. You've seen so many guys. You even saw in the mid-2010s, guys like Tony Parker, Chris Paul, be some of the lead guys on offense for their respective teams. So that's one example. You look at the stats of centers and power forwards through like the 70s, 80s, 90s, to like the 2000s, 2010s, how it's changed to more guards becoming the lead scorers. That points out a pretty good case that the NBA has evolved more into a guard-type league. Although in recent years we've seen centers and power forwards start to see a slight resurgence. We've seen guys like Jokic, Embiid, and guys like Giannis at power forward be lead guys for teams. So we started to see somewhat of an improvement where the centers and power forwards start to score more. It's starting to make a slight comeback in recent years, but the trend's still leading toward guards like Maxey, Steph Curry for years. KD more so as a small forward. Even see Devin Booker as the lead guy with the Suns. We started to note, like I said, Luka with the Lakers. We're starting to see that trend now. Donovan Mitchell with the Cavs. As just several examples where teams are becoming more guard and small forward focus. Like you saw the backcourt of Luka and Kyrie on that Mavs run to the finals. You've seen Jason Tatum with the Celtics. I mean, Jalen Brunson with the Knicks. It's becoming a lot more guard-heavy league. So in that regard, yes, stats do indicate a story. But in terms of like who's the best player of their era, if you wanted to try to have a debate on who's the best player in today's NBA, maybe that's a subject for another time because I'm winding this stream down. Maybe you could say that, like, you're not going to look at stats alone and be like, oh, this guy's leading the league in scoring and automatically equate that to them being the best player in the NBA currently. So far this season, SGA is the best player just like he was last year. And that's part of that is because his availability, because Nikola Jokic, it's pretty much a toss-up currently to me between Jokic when he's healthy and SGA for who's the best player in the NBA currently. But it's leaning more toward SGA now because he's been available more this year. Now, does scoring stats alone tell you who's better? No. You got to look at the bigger picture. Who's more impactful on the team in terms of both sides of the ball in terms of having chemistry with their teammates, in terms of being available and delivering when their team needs them the most. That could be another subject for another time, but the point is, scoring stats, assist stats, rebound stats aren't going to tell that story alone. So, stats are a bit overrated. Sometimes they tell the story, but not all the time. That's my conclusion right there. People tend to focus a little too much on the stats and not looking at the full story before deciding for themselves. So that's my conclusion there. I do feel stats is overrated in regards to people focus on that more than the complete story in terms of judging players, like who's the most impactful. So I'll leave it at that right there. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you guys have a great day. Stay safe if you're in the area. Until next time, it's your boy signing off. Catch you later.